The world can be a cold place, but people shouldn't be. That sounds like there's a reason you said people shouldn't be. Maybe there was a cold person you dealt with, maybe a pain in the ass. Tell me the story on that one.
Yeah, so I was essentially very hungry for growth, and I sort of ended up hiring someone that I felt was a little bit, more hard-nosed than I was. I didn't realize he was masking a lot, and something where he knew how to talk himself up higher than he really was. And maybe in a different organization, it would have worked out. But because we were such a small company and a startup, he didn't understand the nuances of sort of working with such a small, scrappy team. I learned the hard way that sometimes you have to kind of ask around. The more things people came out and said, yeah, this dude's like trouble, he got fired from this company for doing that. Character aside, I learned later on he was also drinking quite a lot and not just off hours. And that's something where I had to kind of pull the trigger.
Welcome to Unlocking Move. We want to cover those key pivotal moments and decision points that really change the lives of successful entrepreneurs and leaders. And I want to hear their stories because I think we learn the most from stories. But I don't want to hear just their glory stories. I want to hear their gory stories because, as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. Today, we've got a treat for you because usually I've had a lot of big name folks on my podcast. I've had the Ellsworths from Poppy. I've had Paul Hedrick from Tecovas, folks who have already made it, a pinnacle of success. Today, I want to talk with Eric Hui, who is in the middle of it. He's in the grind. He's in the middle of the fire. And I want to hear a story from the front line from Eric Hui. So Eric, before we get going, as you might know, I like to hit my guests up with an off-the-wall question or comment, keep them on their toes and really keep my audience on their toes. Ready for this?
I think so.
Well, here
away, Kurt.
Hey, you're here, you're stuck. So you got to do it anyway. Hey, so as I understand, you grew up in Hawaii and you probably did the things that us in the mainland imagine that boys in Hawaii do. Things like surfing and swimming and fishing and luau's and all the stuff. Then you went to Pepperdine on the coast of California. Then you went to Northeastern in Boston where it had to be cold as shit. But you decided you wanted to start an outerwear company, probably because you were cold as shit. So here's my question for you. Are you effing crazy? Started an outerwear company for cold weather as a young Hawaii boy in Boston.
I think that's the sixth time I've heard that actually with the effing part. A little bit, yeah, I think so. Because first of all, it kind of makes sense, but also doesn't make sense. Being from Hawaii, people tend to kind of stick to their warmer weather clothing. A lot of brands are from Hawaii, but they're definitely all in the surf, sun, casual wear kind of I guess model. I think for myself, weather has always been something that's been a center of my kind of thinking. Early on, when I started to travel a little bit more beyond the islands, going to California at first, I kind of realized there was clothing that worked in places that I was not expecting. So a lot of warmer weather clothing was kind of foreign to me at first, especially coming to the East Coast where like you said, it's fucking cold as shit. It's something where I kind of was thrown into this midst of kind of like understanding there's products that I didn't bring to my environment that I should have brought. I think that's kind of where the sort of awakening happened in terms of thinking about apparel in general. So, I'm wearing like this nice, sweatshirt that we kind of make now. And that was kind of the extent of what I had, honestly, when I first came here. I had like, a beginning snowboard jacket to wear. And I realized soon that, in the Northeast here, people layer. And the concept of layering truthfully was a bit foreign to me because I never had to. It's like in LA, it gets cold, but all I have to do is get one coat and that's it. Just like something a little bit warmer and you're pretty much set. Here in the Northeast, it's all about like the variable conditions and things can change week to week, day to day, sometimes hour to hour. So, you can go from 6 C's in the morning or midday to like, 30s or 20s or even teens at night. And that's something that I really wasn't expecting. So yeah.
I was about to say, you've absolutely confirmed that you're crazy because you started a company right out of college and you learned a lot of good things. I can't wait to dive in to all those things. As you guys could hear, my guest today is Eric Hui. He is the founder of Terracea. And Terracea, he founded in 2017 in search of the perfect jacket, quote unquote. Terracea is filling the void between what I say technical outerwear for the slopes and the backwoods and stylish gear for the city. As I mentioned before, Eric is originally from Hawaii, and then he ended up in Boston and lives in New Hampshire. And I'll say welcome, Eric, to Unlocking Moves.
Happy to be here, Kurt. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, hey man, I got to start with saying thank you, because as we talked about earlier, you are open to talk about some of the challenges that you're currently facing, and I really appreciate that. Most of our audience are entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs, and the people around them and support them. And so having your real life story is going to be crucial and very, I hope, inspirational to them as they go through it. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And second of all, I got to say, I got to hear your story. We talked about earlier about your background. You told us a little bit about why you started it, but there's got to be more to the story. Certainly people told you that's the dumbest idea of all time. I mean, tell me how you ended up pulling the trigger and making it happen.
Yeah, it kind of really started with, actually, no one really knows this, but it's actually a brand gap that I saw in the marketplace. One big thing is, I was wearing apparel that was for these guys that were like mountain born and raised. And, like, I live in the mountains, I'll die in the mountains, I guess, something like that. So, and it's something where like, there's mountains in Hawaii, but I'm not really, I wouldn't consider myself a mountaineer. But here I am still wearing the same clothing because it just worked well in the elements. And there's a bit of sort of that understanding that anything around me where it was like from Burton to Mountain Hardware to, even like newer brands like Stio, things like that. It's all this like the same concept of like, designing stuff for the mountain. And I'm like, I'm on the seacoast here. I'm still getting like winds that are blowing me off my ass and freezing cold. And it's like, maybe there's not much snow as much, but it's still really, really cold. And I need stuff that actually will protect me from, the weather, essentially. So that's kind of like the founding stories that I have. It was a brand gap that I saw in the marketplace. And from there, being sort of a product guy, starting from scratch, I guess, I didn't come from an apparel background, kind of learned my way through there. Just kind of understanding the construction of a garment from scratch, learning from a couple of early mentors that did work in industry that kind of taught me the construction of a 3-layer jacket from a shell to insulation fill, things like that, cut and sew. And, truthfully, I'm not really a pattern maker or a sewer, but I do understand a lot of the basic concepts about, things like that.
Well, Eric, I appreciate that. Let me pause there because I do want to come back to some of your background, because I did read somewhere that you have an uncle in the apparel industry. But let me start with the gap that you noticed in the in the outerwear category. A lot of people see a gap in something. Man, I wish they had this, or they ought to do this, or they ought to do that. Not many people follow through on it. So something inspired you to follow through. Was it because you had the uncle that was in the industry that you're like, hey, maybe I can do this? Like, what made you follow through? Because a lot of our audience has those hopes and dreams, but they don't follow through. So I want to inspire those guys and gals to make the leap.
Yeah. Yeah. So my uncle did work in apparel, but it was nothing really close to what I'm doing now. He worked in a t-shirt business. So it was a lot of blanks that he bought and sold. And he sold to a couple of, big brands like Carl Kanai back in the 90s, like almost like streetwear style. So, learned a little bit from him, sort of bought the garments and, getting advances on, loans, things like that, inventory financing. So I kind of learned early on sort of the risks and pitfalls that he went through that I was told not to follow. Funny enough, there are things that now it's like, you kind of know there's a trade-off, but, that was inspiration for me, in a lot of ways. But a lot of it really was just sort of like, I'll be honest, like stubbornness, because the more, I didn't jump this right away. Back in 2015, 2016, I was sort of researching the feasibility of doing such a big endeavor and, realizing that essentially there's like 10 signs that say, no, don't do it, because you'll pretty much run yourself out of business. And I don't know, there's something about it where I'm like, well, everyone's just telling me no, I'm just going to say yes, because why not? Well, now I know the hard way, it's because it's a tough battle. But I think I was kind of also craving a bit of that personal like challenge. For my whole life, I've been working in, corporate environments. I had a couple jobs before that in LA, working in real estate. I worked in leasing. I worked in finance. Then I worked in supply chain for pharmaceuticals. So it's always something where there's an inkling of kind of wanting to try to start something. I guess, the truth is I kind of jumped feet first, I guess, in this project, and thought it would work out. And maybe in an ideal state it would have, but there's a lot of factors that come into play, a lot of timing issues. Is the market receptive to something like a little bit different? How's the economy doing? How are people buying? Things like that, that kind of influence how well a product-based company, especially in apparel, can do in this kind of world, I guess. So I would just say truthfully, it's a bit of kind of like me saying, I'm just going to go for it. And I did. And that's kind of really the hardest part, because then you kind of start developing your tolerance for risk. At first, it was like every little thing, every little setback would make me just take a pause. I just felt this cold shiver down my body. Now I'm numb to it. Things like I could lose all my inventory. And I'm just like, all right, I'll just find a way to pivot and do this. It's like you just kind of start developing your tolerance and feel for risk and kind of like go head on, and there's always a way. You just have to know, I'm fortunate to have a good network and of people that I talk to. So I'll just say it's kind of like over time, you develop people that you can meet and understand and talk with and network with that will kind of hopefully help you out down the road.
Well, I want to come back to that. But before I do, I want to hit on a couple of things you said that are inspirational for entrepreneurs and want to be entrepreneurs. And the first one is a lot of people are going to tell you, no, it's dumb. Don't do it. You're crazy. All those things. And it's up to you to make the decision to make the leap. And that is the hard part, is making that leap into the dark waters that you can't see what's there, jumping off the cliff, whatever the analogy you want to use. That's the biggest step, is taking that first step. And it sounds like over time, you continue to build a tolerance to risk, which is good and bad. I'm sure your wife would probably say is good and bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's always a circumstantial thing, with your family, especially if you're married with kids. That's something that I would advise any kind of aspiring entrepreneur to really have a long discussion about, because it will be taxing. I will say, there's been transparently, I've dug deep into my personal finances, into a kind of our joint situation where, sometimes you just have to kind of understand, if you have a partner that's willing to support you, if you're solo, how much risk and, debt and things like that you want to assume to kind of make your dream come true. I think for me, it's always been sort of this drive that I felt I was building something much bigger than myself, which is kind of crazy, because I'm not the kind of person to typically do this. But I felt the brand, there's like this thing about this New England company building for the weather around here that's so variable and so different from extremes to mild. There's a bit of a story. And I think that's what kind of really kept me through. I'm like, this is my kind of one shot. I want to do something big. And, if I give up now, at least I know I tried, but there's always that kind of like, what if I didn't see this through long enough to kind of see it have legs and kind of start taking off. So that's what's kind of really been pushing me.
I love that. I want to move to, I want to talk about your story and what Terracea means, because I know it has some special meaning to you. Tell me what the words or the word Terracea means. If you're just joining us on Unlocking Moves, today's episode is brought to you as usual by HireBetter, the strategic talent partner for growth-minded entrepreneurs everywhere.
Well, it's actually just an amalgamation of two different things. One is Terra, which is Latin for earth, which everyone knows. Sea actually comes from Greek, which is panacea, which is remedy or solution. But I like to say, Terracea really unpacked at its core really is about the weather. And weather for me stands for everything above the earth. So from rain, wind, sleet, snow, that's all stuff that, we all kind of deal with. Sun at times, obviously from Hawaii. But also like the fact is, like, as a brand, we want to kind of offer what is a solution for all earth, which is, anything from whether you're going to hike Machu Picchu or go to Hawaii for a vacation, hint, hint, there's things that we're developing that are going to be more Hawaiian sun focused. It's something where I think as a brand, it's something where like the name is memory friendly, it's catchy, and there's something about it where we can still be kind of a fun vibe and capture kind of my vibe while still kind of really producing highest quality technical products that really work in the weather. So like I'm not a skier, transparently. It's something where everyone knows this. I'm actually a very casual snowboarder, and I'll admit it. I'm not good because I never grew up around here. I can only go a couple times a year. I don't spend 100 days a year snowboarding. But we develop products with the mindset that it's got to work well for the weather. Our Sorrel shell just won overall shell of the year by Ski Magazine, which is powered by Outside Inc. Crazy. We're stacking up against Helly Hansen, Arc'teryx, multi-billion-dollar companies, and I'm just one dude that's working in the warehouse of a really small team, and we won overall shell of the year. That's absolutely insane to me. So it shows that we put our mind into product first, design, development, materials. That's all stuff that we kind of really select carefully as a team. And I think there'll be more to come.
Hey, so tell me more about that award, because that sounds really cool. You won, did you say Shell of the Year against some really big competition? Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So, one thing we started doing about a year and a half ago was really focus on PR. We have a great team. Kate and Jordana are our PR people, and, they have their own agency that has been really, honestly, very instrumental in kind of our growth as a brand. So we actually sent a lot of products out last year for all kinds of reviewers, and for everything from travel magazines to like Better Homes and Gardens to, places like Ski Magazine, which is, like Outside Ink. So we actually won a couple awards, which is crazy. So our shell won Best Overall Shell of the Year in 2024, which is insane. This is not product placement. We don't pay for this. It's just we send them to reviewers and they do what they want. I wasn't expecting much, for the cost of a landed product, but ends up, they liked it because I think the thought process is I didn't design around sort of looking good on the mountain. I think a lot of these other brands where it's all mountain focus, you want to stand out. You want to show that you have, strong color blocking, whatever. I think for us, it's all been about like different tenets that we design around. So for example, quiet materials. No one thinks about quietness, but I do, because if I'm wearing a shell that's off the mountain, I want it to be not noisy, things like stretch, articulation, utility. I think we just kind of made a product that was a little bit different in people's eyes. And I think that's kind of enough to kind of really stand out, which is great. And, we have a couple other products such as our women's Vinda. It's a lightweight puffer that is treated. So it's actually water resistant, but also super comfy to wear. You can wear it on a plane. You can bundle it up as a pillow. And it kind of does a lot. So it can go from an everyday jacket to a ski jacket, essentially. And it kind of really has that versatility. So I like to think, we approach things differently as a product and from a product design perspective, which is why we're kind of starting to stick out.
Hey, let's stick on that for a second, because I want to do two things. One is I want to help you, and two, I want to help our listeners. So I want to, if you're okay with this, I'd like to give away a jacket on the show. We'll do something through Instagram is probably the best way, and promote a giveaway of a jacket. Is the best one to give away, is it the Magnus jacket or the one you just described? What's the best one?
Yeah, I would say the men's Magnus has sort of been our overall bestseller, just because of, like you said, it's the most versatile product that we have. So it is a puffer jacket, and it's a great mid or outer layer. So mid layer for skiing, outer for just for every day. So I'd love to kind of give one away to your listeners. That'd be
if a female wins, can they win a female version of the same jacket? Is a similar jacket?
Certainly, yes. Yeah, we can definitely.
Okay, all right, perfect. And then secondly, I want to help you out. So can we provide a promotional discount code, 20% off or something like that, with Unlocking Moves or HireBetter, one of the two, to provide to listeners to get a little discount on a product?
Yes, definitely. I will create a code for you, and we'll definitely distribute that after the show to promote.
Perfect. We've got tens, if not dozens, of people lining up to order jackets from you guys. Hopefully it helps.
That'd be awesome.
We'll put something out on Instagram for that too. So I appreciate that. I love hearing about the product. Okay. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about people, because I've seen a couple of quotes with you associated with people, and obviously I'm in the people business. So let's talk about them a bit.
Yeah.
A couple of quotes. The first quote is, "The world can be a cold place, but people shouldn't be." And I want to pause there for a second, because that sounds like there's a reason you said people shouldn't be. Maybe there was a cold person you dealt with, maybe a pain in the ass. Tell me the story on that one.
Yeah. So early on, it was actually midway kind of through my 7-year journey, is I was kind of reaching this inflection point of, what do I do? Because initially we had overcommitted to a lot of inventory that couldn't sell. And, this was kind of part of our restart in recouping some of that in cash from essentially outletting a lot of our products. And, I wouldn't call it a failure, but it was a big learning lesson that as a product-based business, you need a ton more than just product to kind of be successful. With that, I was essentially very hungry for growth, and I sort of ended up hiring someone that I felt was a little bit, more hard-nosed than I was. I would just say his name was Tom. He was someone that I had hired initially to sort of be a sales manager for me. At the time, I also had another gentleman named Mike, who I'll kind of mention about later, but he's actually our very first employee, a great kid out of University of New Hampshire here. Did some really good work for us. But Tom, as a hire, was someone that I thought I could put trust in because he seemed to know the part. He seemed to know a lot of people in the industry. What I didn't realize was he was masking a lot, and something where he knew how to talk himself up higher than he really was. And maybe in a different organization, it would have worked out. But because we were such a small company and a startup, he didn't understand the nuances of sort of working with such a small, scrappy team, as I like to call it, and the limitations around that. So grandiose ideas of kind of marketing and trade show marketing and doing all this to impress people, whining and dining, that's all stuff that he was used to. And that's not something that honestly I was, or kind of was comfortable kind of doing just because we had a limit. And, it's something where I learned the hard way that sometimes you have to kind of ask around. So the more I asked around about Tom, the more things people came out and said, yeah, this dude's like trouble. He got fired from this company for doing that. Character aside, I learned later on he was also drinking quite a lot and not just off hours. And that was something where I had to kind of pull the trigger in a lot of ways.
He sounds like a character in my book. Who's Your Mike? I know we were going to get to that in a second, but it sounds like maybe Resume Ralph, who's so full of shit and makes stuff up all the time to make himself look good or herself look good. Maybe this is a good segue in talking about the book. I wasn't intended to do it right now, but I know you've read the book. You mentioned that you really appreciated it. You have a favorite character from the book?
I think the one that resonated the most was probably Mike, just because, my second character, which I'll segue after you talk about the book a little bit, but, that was a character that I felt strongly about just because I went through the ups and downs of kind of my first hire and sort of growing with him.
Yeah, Mike is the title character, but he's just one of many. But he's definitely, or she is an early stage employee that grows with the company. At some point, he or she outgrows or their position outgrows them, and they often get promoted to leadership positions. Maybe they're your CFO, and they're really just a decent accountant. And it sounds like you had a real life situation with Mike. Doesn't mean it's a bad person. He's a bad person. It just means that your company's outgrown that role. Well, back on your Tom story, it sounds a lot like Resume Ralph, which is the person that you bring in from the outside. They got a great resume. Maybe talk about all the cool things that they did with a major supplier, or maybe someone else in the outerwear industry. And unless you really do your due diligence with people that you trust, you might get burned with somebody who's more hat and less cowboy, as we say here in Texas.
Yeah, pretty much. He had a big hat and he liked to flaunt it. But it was something also too where I realized early on, because of this kind of pivotal moment where I was a little desperate, honestly, for sales. It was hard to come by. I understand there's a whole sort of marketing mix and different factors that came with generating demand for your brand and your product. So I kind of relied on him a little bit too much to sort of dictate where to go to make sales because he was a sales professional. And the problem is he loved skiing and I didn't ski. And he felt the best way to do Terracea is to turn Terracea into essentially a ski brand. So this is kind of the start of sort of a very painful re-pivoting back, which is where you kind of see the brand now. But there's a foray where, I understood the ski market was big, especially in the Northeast. People are very passionate about it. They love their brands that come out from here too. But truthfully, there's always a conflict at the core because I'm not a skier. I could claim to understand it. I could pretend to understand it, but I never really understood it fully. So relying on Tom to kind of dictate, he overstepped a bit into like product design. There's always a bit of conflict of sort of like what I was looking for versus what he felt would sell into retailers. Also kind of began his foray into understanding that we were too early for wholesale and distribution there, because when you let wholesale dictate your business revenue and your vertical, you have to make sure your manufacturing and your finance side can support that. And truthfully, we just weren't able to. We really should have focused on direct online from day one, which is something that I thought I tried and it failed, which is why I pivoted to wholesale because it wasn't working. Then I understood now it just takes a little bit more time and getting the right people on board. So I think Tom was a learning lesson that sometimes, you have to really, it's hard because unless you come from experience, you don't have that sort of internal compass to kind of say, this is, maybe I should kind of pivot and not do this. But just lessons learned, I guess.
Yeah, Eric, that's a powerful lesson. The brand is built on your vision, and so you had a vision for what you wanted it to be. And there comes a point where you do need folks who have some experience to help drive that, but you don't want to water down what your vision. And in this case, A lot of people want to hire somebody from that industry and leverage their skill sets, which is great, but they often bring some baggage from what is not working in the industry or what they've done in the past, and you're trying to do something different. So you learned a powerful lesson, and thanks for sharing it with our listeners.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was definitely something where you have to kind of understand yourself and really stick with that. I think the one thing I would say is for anyone, just stick with your brand nucleus and what you're about. And if the brand is about you as a founder, make sure that's near and dear to your heart and always dictates anything you do as a decision.
Nice. Well, I know from my own experience and experience of dozens of, actually hundreds of others, that an entrepreneurial journey is filled with many ups and downs, and perseverance is absolutely a key character trait. I want to talk with you about a couple of ups and downs. I know there's a story out there about ordering some cloth or fabric that was the color that you thought you wanted and it ended up not being the case. Tell me about that, because I think that's a great story.
Yeah, we worked with a vendor that, I was recommended to from our first designer. Again, they seem pretty reputable. They have a very big name. Here's a little hint, they actually make cars, which is funny. So one of those brands had a fabrics division. And, lesson learned there too is their office was in Japan, but they relied on their US team, which is essentially two people, to communicate to all of their US clients. There's a bit of a disconnect because the way Japanese do business and communicate is a little different than what US audience is kind of known for and how do you like to communicate. So internally, they actually had a lot of issues between the two teams, which is something I found out after the fact. The story is we ordered dyed rolls from them, which is, fabric. It's a 2-layer technical fabric. So laminated with kind of dye to make the color. Really, really good stuff. Except the problem is they sent one roll that was correct, and then they sent 7 rolls that were not correct, which is essentially what happened was they chose the wrong color or added too much white. So it became completely washed out. We actually had that same color, which is navy, also happened in black too, which we could not kind of get around. But the navy, we ended up getting these products in stock after they were produced. We got top of line, but the one they chose to send for navy was correct. So we're like, oh, this is great. Top of line production looks awesome. Send it. Then we ended up getting like, a pallet full, 2 pallets full of products that were completely different. It looked like it was grayish blue, and this was not what we had marketed. But the spin around is we ended up having to say, hey, I'm going to mark this as a different color because we had to. It wasn't navy. No one could sell as navy. We ended up calling it Storm Blue, which is like our just made up name. And it was actually our bestseller, funny enough, because it was something that was different that wasn't on the market. And I found that, people like things that stand out and are like a little bit more unique. So that's always a lesson that I try to take away as well, even when it comes to selecting current products as well.
Man, I love that story. And you differentiated yourselves without intending to on the color, and you made lemonade out of lemons, which is a very powerful entrepreneurial trait. And just coming up with the name Storm Blue, and kind of, I'm imagining a couple of folks sitting in the back room saying, hey, we can make something out of this, and let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that's brilliant. And I just goes to some of that grit and perseverance an entrepreneurs need.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of that, just making, lemons, I guess. A lot of these bumps that come in the way, you just have to kind of know how to deal with it, and just use your best judgment.
Hey, any other cool stories or tidbits of lessons learned that you want to share along those lines that would be powerful for our listeners?
There's so many, honestly. I would say the one thing I can say is, I'm in a very interesting position of actually being a true startup in manufacturing in apparel, which is tough. A lot of times you see companies that come out, they're not really startups. They come from funding, they have VC backing, or they come from a different parent company that wants to spin off a startup. So I learned, really the restraints of starting up a company that makes jackets. And that's something that I love to kind of tell people is the people that added the fuel to the fire that told me I couldn't do it, they were right. Absolutely right. Because there's so many factors when it comes to making stuff that you have to be aware of. You can't just make stuff, and even if you have the money to do it, can you sell through? And that's the biggest part. And not only that, can you budget the cash flow for not just one season, but 2 or 3 seasons? Because sometimes you need to kind of stagger this kind of like cash flow riddle in a lot of times when you manufacture. How are you going to line of credit to make the stuff if you haven't made the sales yet? So there's a lot of things that, a lot of factors. I would just say, talk to people and, understand someone that's been through the process. Talk to me if anyone wants to actually produce products overseas, manufacturing overseas. That's something where I love to kind of share my experience and firsthand, I'll give you some kind advice, but also tell you what I did wrong that was, I would probably wouldn't do again.
Well, I definitely want to come back to that because lessons learned about what not to do are very, very powerful. Thank you for offering to be a sounding board for folks. We're going to make sure they know how. Actually, let's tell us right now. What's the best way to reach you and connect with you?
Sure. You can just send an email, Eric, ERIC at terracea.com, TERACEA.com, or you just send us contact us info on our website, and I'll definitely get back to you soon.
Okay, awesome. I noticed presence for you on LinkedIn. I didn't notice much on Instagram. Was there an Instagram site that I didn't catch for Terracea?
Oh yeah, it's Terracea Co. Company.
Yeah, we'll definitely track that down. We'll put that as part of the giveaway. We'll promote it through Terracea Co. All right,
That'd be great.
All right, so we're at the part of the show where I want to ask you, what is your unlocking move? And just as a reminder, unlocking move is a key pivotal moment or decision point that really changed the trajectory of your career or your life or your company. You know what one might have been there for you?
I would say I have a current business partner. His name's Vic. Vic's a tier, great guy. Comes from a background that is very different than mine. So yeah, I found out through my kind of journey, there are sort of limitations as a founder that every founder will kind of realize. Mine was marketing. I'm just a terrible marketer. I don't like talking about myself. I don't like doing this. I'm a doer. I like getting things done. I like timelines. I like making sure things work well. But the problem is when you start up a brand, especially in this space, you need a lot of marketing and the strategy that comes with it. So Vic kind of was someone that I was introduced to at first. He actually worked for me as a consultant, and for a year we kind of talked about this is the post Tom era, I like to say, and we were kind of at this point where essentially I told him I wanted to kind of find a way to essentially pivot back away from ski, away from wholesale and ski, because it was never really meant to be. I don't know how much longer I could fake, being in the industry, not being a skier and not understanding. And, now you're making products that if I don't understand the industry, how can I make stuff that I can service, customers with? So it became a conversation of, can we turn the true concept of Terracea and bring it to life, which is all season readiness for the weather. And, can we also make Terracea.com our main storefront? So with this help and sort of working with them, we've really ramped up our marketing. I like to say our websites look the best it's ever been. You can kind of take a look afterwards. It looks pretty damn good, I like to say. So kind of, I'd say with Vic, and he's a very no nonsense kind of guy, which is great, because I think I also realized too, as a founder, I like to say yes to a lot of people. And I think there's something that's my person. Maybe I'm from Hawaii, I don't know. I just like them, I like to maybe people please a little bit too much. And sometimes, I'll agree to things that maybe may not make sense down the road from a strategic perspective. So Vic is kind of the balance where he understands what needs to be done and what shouldn't be done. And I think that's something where we work as a team in a lot of ways, but he's kind of like the gut reality check for me in a lot of times where, if a decision needs to be done, we do talk about it together and sort of approach it from a team's perspective. So probably my biggest unlocking move at this point.
I love it. Unlocking move was finding and ultimately partnering with Vic. I love that story. There's actually a character in our book. The last couple of chapters is about Next Level Natalie, which is absolutely that. And my partner in all of my business dealings has been Brett Lawson, who's been fantastic for me. Totally different than me, brings a different skill set, and he completes me, just like it sounds like Vic completes you in many ways. Well, that's great to hear.
Awesome. It was a good journey with them too. Yeah, it's been good.
Very nice. Well, thank you for sharing. I think that's the case for a lot of entrepreneurs. If we can find somebody that complements us and has the skill set that we don't have, and make us better overall, that's a great partner to have. So I like to ask a question I call the listener's advocate question, Eric. I like to put myself in the position of a listener. If I've got Eric Hui here in a room one-on-one, what would I want to ask? What would I want Kurt to ask? So here's a question I came up with, and it might be a raw question, so you tell me. The question is, Eric, would you do it again? Feel free to pass on the question if you'd like. I can get another one for you.
I would say yes, I would, but I would not start it the same way I did 7 years ago. I would have done things a lot differently, but I would probably have started that journey because the real catalyst was I wanted to create something on my own. And I think that's something where I wanted to create a brand, which is the hardest thing. Sometimes it's something where you can make a better product. You can go to engineering school and kind of design something, make something that can go in Shark Tank. For myself, it's a little bigger than that too. It's something I wanted to make a brand that represented both myself, but for a lot of people that I felt, were kind of misrepresented, in sort of like the gear that you're forced to wear from brands that don't quite tell that same story. So I would say I'd do it again, but I would be a lot more smarter about it.
I love it. That's a great answer. And let me ask you this. A lot of people like to give the top 3 tips to do this or follow my playbook. I would love to know from you the top 3 or 2 or 3 things of what not to do, lessons that you learned that you wouldn't want to repeat.
Ooh, there's too many. I'd say off the top of my head, um, find your network that supports you from the start. So, for myself, there's a lot of kind of reaffirmation from family and friends that, I talk to a lot. Find those people that will help you and won't shy away from giving you the hard advice, I think, early on. But not people that are strangers because they don't understand your position. They don't understand what you're coming from. Find people that know where you're coming from and will still give you the hard advice, I'd say. Number 2 is scaling is be very careful. People like to think, oh, I have a hot brand. Oh, I sold through all my products. Let's scale. There's a lot more to it, especially when you go into different, distribution models and channels. There's things where I would recommend taking your time. Even if it comes to taking a year, because you're so early on in your trajectory, you can take a year and just focus on marketing. Don't make new stuff. And unless you can actually guarantee you can achieve, a good percentage of sell through. I would say, for myself, I rushed, this is part of the Tom era where we went from like 0 to 100 in scale. And that was terrible mistake. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Even as a small company, we had the products. It's just like, it was not the right move. So test the market, find fit and, talk to a lot of people. Number 3 is, I would just say, try to be kind to yourself. I beat myself up over every little detail. And that's something where you need a balance to make yourself happy. And I think we talked about this earlier, but I somehow find my kind of zen in just like shooting hoops, like I go to the Y and just play basketball. And I'm not a basketball player. I've never been until I was like 35. So something where I just kind of found something that took my mind away, just seeing for an hour, even like 1 hour every 2 or 3 days, just kind of go and do something on your own and kind of reset. Find a way to reset because otherwise your work becomes all consuming, like you're on your phone all day checking emails, things come up, while you're having dinner with your family, and you have to kind of find a way to kind of just recalibrate and try to balance as much as you can. It's all about the harmony of kind of your life versus your work, as much as people like burning out, because that's what people are supposed to do, right?
And thanks for sharing on that, Eric. I'm going to reframe a couple things and say what not to do includes don't listen to the wrong people. Don't try to grow too fast. Don't try to rush to market without understanding what the market is asking for. Don't beat yourself up. And then one absolute do is to take care of yourself because you can't grow a company or take care of your family if you're not taking care of yourself mentally and physically.
Yeah, that does exactly occur. And I actually want to add one more too. It's especially when you're early on as a small company looking to grow. If it sounds too good to be true, double, triple, quadruple check and don't jump in because sometimes I've gone through this a couple times now where certain things come up and it does sound too good to be true. And after some digging, it was too good to be true. So be careful and, really try and cover all your bases. Find a good law firm or attorney that you can kind of work with and balance things out. And I did my own bookkeeping early on, but something where a good bookkeeper also helps too. One that understands your business model. If you're an e-commerce company, there are certain things that you need an accountant that understands your business a little bit better too. So find good supplemental team members that help you out.
Absolutely. You've got to understand what the numbers mean. Okay. I've got one trick question left. Tell me one question you're never asked, and either you're glad they don't ask or you secretly wish they would ask.
People like the names that we have for our styles, but no one ever asked where they came from. At first, I kind of said plants in nature, which is true to an extent. Actually, I have a really funny story. No one really knows this, and I don't know if I should say it, but I've been naming some. I won't say which ones, but there's some ones that come to the top of my head, and I just kind of make it a name. One's actually named after a football player on my fantasy football team, which no one knows about. I won't say who, but it is something where that's the line of thinking that I have. And we're kind of making a more mature approach about things, but I could say some of the unique names that came up in the past, last couple of years, we were just kind of like a result of brainstorming. But I kind of like to keep things fun. It's a little different too, something no one thinks about. So just want to kind of throw that out there.
I can only imagine how much pressure and stress it is, because it's hard to name a baby. It's hard to name a company, and it's got to be hard to name specific products. So I'm glad I don't have to do that. I can just criticize. I don't have to do it myself.
Yeah, there's a lot. Everyone does market research, but end of the day, you just have to find something that's meaningful, for your company.
Awesome, man. Thanks for sharing. Hey, Eric, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Everyone, thanks so much for listening, liking, subscribing. Please go give us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you consume your podcasts. And Eric, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your unlocking move and some trials and tribulations from your journey. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kurt. Really appreciate it, Tom.
If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.